Christmas Eve had always carried a strange ache for Sarah Mitchell. The twinkling lights, the scent of cinnamon, the cheerful songs playing in every store window, none of it ever quite reached her heart. For most people, Christmas meant warmth, family, and belonging. For Sarah, it had become a yearly reminder of everything she had lost. Still, this year was supposed to be different. As she gripped the steering wheel tightly, parked outside her parents' sprawling mansion, she glanced at her 8-year-old daughter sitting beside her. Lily's bright hazel eyes sparkled with excitement, her small hands carefully holding a red gift box wrapped in uneven paper and decorated with tiny hand-drawn snowflakes. "Do you think Grandma will like it?" Lily asked softly, her voice trembling with nervous hope. Sarah forced a smile. "She'll love it, sweetheart. You worked so hard on it." Inside that box was a hand-knitted scarf Lily had spent nearly 2 months making herself. Every stitch was uneven, every edge slightly crooked, but it had been crafted with more love than anything money could buy. Sarah wished she shared her daughter's optimism. Her parents, Richard and Margaret Collins, valued only appearances. To them, wealth defined worth. Since Sarah had become a single mother after her husband's sudden death 5 years earlier, they had treated her like a family embarrassment. They had never accepted her modest life, her small apartment, or her decision to raise Lily without depending on their money. But tonight, Sarah had convinced herself things might change. It was Christmas. Maybe the season would soften them. Maybe Lily's innocence would melt their coldness. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped out of the car, taking Lily's hand as they approached the glowing front doors of the mansion. Through the windows, golden chandeliers sparkled above perfectly dressed guests. Laughter drifted outside like music from another world. The door opened before they could knock. Margaret stood there, dressed in emerald silk and diamonds. Her eyes swept over Sarah's simple navy dress, then over Lily's handmade white cardigan. "Well," Margaret said coolly, "at least you managed to look presentable." Sarah's chest tightened. "Merry Christmas, Mom." Margaret merely stepped aside. Inside, the house glittered with luxury. A towering Christmas tree touched the ceiling, dripping with crystal ornaments and gold ribbons. The dining room overflowed with expensive decorations and catered food. Sarah's brother Daniel smirked as they entered. "Look who finally showed up," he muttered to his wife. Lily squeezed Sarah's hand tighter. Dinner passed in strained silence. Every attempt Sarah made at conversation was met with clipped responses or dismissive glances. Then came the gift exchange. Guests gathered around the enormous tree as servants distributed presents wrapped in designer paper. One by one, family members opened extravagant gifts, diamond earrings, luxury watches, expensive vacations. Finally, Lily stood clutching her small red box. Her cheeks glowed pink as she approached Margaret. "Grandma," she said shyly, "I made this for you." The room quieted. Margaret slowly accepted the box, her polished nails tearing through the uneven wrapping. When she pulled out the handmade scarf, her lips curled. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Daniel laughed. "What is that?" A few relatives chuckled. Margaret held the scarf up like it was something dirty. "This is your gift?" she asked. Lily's smile faltered. "I made it myself." Margaret gave a sharp, humorless laugh. How creative. Richard leaned back in his chair. "Margaret, perhaps we should frame it as proof that public schools have truly failed." The room erupted in laughter. Sarah froze, her blood turned cold as she watched Lily's tiny face crumble. The child looked around at the mocking smiles, confusion filling her tearful eyes. "I worked really hard," Lily whispered. Margaret placed the scarf back into the box and set it aside. "Well, dear," she said, "next year perhaps ask your mother to buy something respectable." That was the final blow. Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she lowered her head. Then, without saying a word, she turned and quietly walked across the room toward the oldest person, sitting silently near the fire, Great-Grandpa Walter. And as she leaned close to whisper something into his ear, the old man's face changed instantly. The laughter in the room slowly faded, but the sting of humiliation lingered like smoke after a fire. Sarah stood frozen near the Christmas tree, her hands trembling at her sides. Every cruel laugh, every mocking glance, every smirk from her family felt like a blade twisting deeper into her chest. But what shattered her most was the sight of Lily's small shoulders slumped in heartbreak. Her daughter had spent weeks pouring love into that scarf. Every evening after school, Lily had sat on their worn living room couch, tongue poking out in concentration as she carefully learned each stitch from online tutorials. Her little fingers had fumbled countless times, and more than once she had unraveled entire rows to start over. "It has to be perfect for Grandma," she had said. Sarah had wanted to believe that maybe this gift could build a bridge between them. Now she hated herself for bringing Lily here. Across the room, Grandpa Walter sat motionless in his antique armchair by the fireplace. At 86, he was a quiet presence during family gatherings, often dismissed by everyone as too old and too tired to notice much of what happened around him. But Sarah had always known better. Walter noticed everything. His faded blue eyes still held sharp intelligence beneath the veil of age. As Lily leaned close and whispered into his ear, Sarah saw his frail body stiffen. His expression shifted instantly. The sadness in his face was replaced by something darker: shock, then disbelief, and finally a cold stillness Sarah had never seen before. Walter slowly turned his gaze toward Richard and Margaret. For the first time that evening, the room seemed to grow uneasy. "What did she say?" Daniel muttered under his breath. Margaret adjusted her pearl necklace, clearly uncomfortable under Walter's sudden stare. Lily stepped back from her great-grandfather and quietly wiped her tears. Walter reached out, taking her small hand into his weathered one. His voice, though soft, carried across the room. "Lily, sweetheart, are you absolutely sure?" She nodded. "Yes, Grandpa Walter. I heard them talking last week when Mommy dropped me off here." The room fell silent. Sarah frowned. "What are you talking about, Lily?" Before Lily could answer, Richard stood abruptly. "She's a child," he snapped. "Children imagine things." Walter's eyes narrowed. "She sounds quite certain." Margaret forced a brittle laugh. "Oh, Walter, really? It's Christmas Eve. Surely we aren't going to entertain childish fantasies." But Walter didn't look away from them. He looked at Lily. "What exactly did you hear, child?" Lily glanced nervously at Sarah. "I heard Grandma tell Grandpa that Mommy would never know the truth because the papers were destroyed, and Grandpa said Grandpa Walter was too old to ever find out." A sharp crash broke the silence. Daniel had dropped his wineglass. Red liquid spread across the marble floor like spilled blood. Sarah's breath caught. "What papers?" And no one answered. Richard's face had turned ghostly pale. Margaret's polished smile vanished. Lily misunderstood. Margaret said quickly. She overheard adults discussing business. Walter slowly rose from his chair, leaning heavily on his cane. Despite his age, his presence suddenly filled the room with quiet authority. What business exactly? No one spoke. Sarah's heart pounded. 1,000 memories flashed through her mind. Her father convincing her to sign legal documents after her husband's death, claiming they were insurance matters, the sudden loss of the small property her late husband had left behind, their insistence that financial complications had made everything disappear. For years she had accepted their explanation. Now doubt crept in like ice. Walter's jaw tightened. "Richard, Margaret, my study, now." His voice was firm enough to silence the room. Richard hesitated. "Father, now." The command cut through the air like thunder. As her parents reluctantly followed Walter toward his study, Sarah stood rooted in place. Lily walked back to her and slipped her tiny hand into hers. Sarah knelt down, brushing tears from her daughter's cheeks. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. "Grandma said they stole what belonged to you and that nobody would ever believe you." Sarah's blood ran cold. And behind the heavy oak doors of Walter's study, raised voices had already begun to echo through the house. The heavy oak doors of Grandpa Walter's study remained shut for nearly an hour. Outside, the once celebratory Christmas gathering had turned tense and silent. The warm glow of the chandeliers no longer felt comforting. Even the crackling fireplace seemed unnaturally loud against the thick blanket of unease that had settled over the mansion. Sarah sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Beside her, Lily leaned against her shoulder, unusually quiet. Every passing minute felt unbearable. From inside the study came muffled voices, sometimes low and controlled, sometimes rising sharply. Once, Sarah distinctly heard her mother's voice, shrill and panicked. "You can't prove anything," then silence again. The relatives exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. Daniel paced near the grand staircase, his face pale and restless. His wife avoided eye contact altogether. Sarah's heart pounded harder with each second. Her mind replayed Lily's words over and over. "They stole what belonged to you." Could it be true? 5 years earlier, after her husband Michael had died in a tragic highway accident, Sarah had been too devastated to think clearly. In the fog of grief, her parents had stepped in to help. They had handled the legal paperwork, managed Michael's estate, and assured her that mounting debts had consumed nearly everything he left behind, including the lake house his family had owned for generations. At the time, she had trusted them. They were her parents. Now, sitting beneath the glittering Christmas tree, she felt sick, realizing how blind that trust might have been. Then, at exactly 10 o'clock, the study doors opened. Grandpa Walter emerged first. Though his face was grave, his eyes burned with fierce purpose. Behind him came Richard and Margaret. They looked shattered. Richard's usually commanding posture had collapsed. Margaret's makeup was streaked where tears had run down her cheeks. Walter stepped into the center of the room and struck his cane sharply against the marble floor. The sound silenced everyone instantly. "Gather around," he said. No one dared disobey. The family formed a tense circle around him. Walter looked directly at Sarah. "My dear, what I'm about to tell you should have been revealed years ago." Sarah slowly stood, her breath catching. Walter held up a thick folder of yellowed documents. "These are the original records of Michael's estate." Richard visibly flinched. Walter continued, "When Michael died, he left you the lake house, his investment portfolio, and a trust fund worth nearly $2 million for Lily." Gasps rippled through the room. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "What?" Walter's voice hardened. "Your parents forged financial loss reports and destroyed copies of the legal transfer documents. They sold the lake house, emptied the investment accounts, and redirected every cent into offshore holdings under Daniel's name." The room erupted. Daniel stepped back, shaking his head. "I didn't know enough," Walter thundered. He turned toward Richard and Margaret. "For 5 years, you robbed your own daughter and granddaughter while allowing them to struggle." Margaret burst into tears. "We only wanted to protect the family wealth. By stealing from your family," Walter shot back. Sarah's knees weakened. Her entire body shook as the truth crashed over her. All those years of working double shifts, the nights she'd gone hungry so Lily could eat, the tiny apartment, the constant fear of unpaid bills, all while the future Michael had carefully built for them had been stolen by the very people she had trusted most. Tears filled her eyes, but before she could speak, Walter knelt before Lily. "Do you know what your whisper gave me tonight, child?" Lily shook her head. "The courage to finally investigate what I long suspected." He gently squeezed her hand. "You exposed the truth." Then Walter rose and faced the family once more. "This morning, before dinner, I signed new legal documents." He handed an envelope to Sarah. Inside were property deeds, bank certifications, and official notarized papers. "The stolen assets have been recovered through emergency legal action." Sarah's breath caught. Walter's voice rang through the silent room. "The entire Collins estate, this house, all investments, and every family holding, will pass solely to Sarah and Lily upon my death." A stunned silence followed. Richard's face drained of all color. Margaret let out a broken sob. And beneath the glittering Christmas tree, justice had finally arrived. The silence that followed Grandpa Walter's announcement felt heavier than the winter storm gathering outside. No one moved, no one spoke. The grand Collins mansion, once filled with smug laughter and cruel mockery, had become a courtroom of judgment. The sparkling Christmas lights reflected across stunned faces, but their glow could not soften the shock hanging in the air. Sarah stood frozen, clutching the envelope Walter had placed in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the documents inside, official transfer papers, Recovered account statements, property deeds, and legal certifications bearing signatures and seals she could hardly process. It was real. Everything Michael had left for her and Lily had never been lost. It had been stolen. 5 years of struggle, 5 years of exhaustion, 5 years of working endless shifts at the hospital, missing sleep, skipping meals, pretending everything was okay so Lily would never feel the crushing weight of poverty. All because of the people standing across from her, her own parents. Margaret suddenly stepped forward, tears streaking her powdered cheeks. "Sarah, please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We can explain." Sarah slowly looked up. For years, she had imagined this moment, her parents finally showing regret, finally admitting what they had done. But now that it was here, she felt no satisfaction in their tears, only clarity. "What exactly could you possibly explain?" Sarah asked, her voice calm and cold. Richard clenched his fists. "We made mistakes." "No," Sarah said firmly, "you made choices." Her words struck harder than any shout. Richard's face tightened with shame. Margaret reached for her daughter's hand, but Sarah stepped back. "You watched Lily struggle. You watched me work myself to exhaustion. You let us suffer while living off what Michael left for us." Margaret's lips trembled. We thought you would waste it." A bitter laugh escaped Sarah. "You thought I wasn't good enough to control my own life." Walter's cane struck the marble floor again. "Enough!" His voice cut through the tension like thunder. Richard and Margaret fell silent. Walter looked toward the towering Christmas tree where dozens of expensive presents still sat untouched. Then his gaze settled on Lily. "Child," he said gently, "would you bring me your gift?" Lily hesitated before retrieving the handmade scarf from where Margaret had carelessly set it aside. She handed it to him with trembling fingers. Walter carefully unfolded the scarf. His weathered hands traced each uneven stitch as a soft smile touched his face. "This," he said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "is the most valuable gift in this house." He wrapped the scarf around his neck. It was made with honesty, love, and effort. 3 things this family has forgotten. Tears filled Lily's eyes. Sarah knelt and pulled her daughter close. Walter turned to Richard and Margaret. "You mocked a child's love because you no longer understand what real wealth is." Then he faced the gathered relatives. "Richard and Margaret Collins are hereby removed from all financial authority, family trusts, and estate access, effective immediately." Daniel opened his mouth to protest. Walter silenced him with a glare. "And if anyone contests this decision, every record of theft and fraud will be delivered to the authorities by morning." The room fell deathly still. Richard's shoulders collapsed. Margaret sank into a chair, openly sobbing. For the first time in their lives, they looked small, broken, powerless, but Sarah felt no triumph in their humiliation. Her revenge was not their suffering. It was her freedom. She took Lily's hand and turned toward the front door. "Where are you going?" Walter asked softly. Sarah smiled through tears. "Home." Walter nodded. "Not for long. The lake house is being prepared for you both." Outside, fresh snow had begun to fall, blanketing the world in white. As Sarah and Lily stepped into the cold night, Lily looked up at her. "Mummy, did I do something bad?" Sarah knelt and kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart. You did something brave." Lily smiled. And as they walked toward their car beneath the falling snow, Sarah realized this was the first Christmas Eve in years that truly felt like Christmas. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge wasn't destruction. It was finally getting the life you were always meant to have.